Good evening, everyone. It's 6:01, so I'm going to call to order the Affordable Housing Collaborative on Thursday, March 27th. And we will start with roll call. Bethany Sorrentino.
Amy Crawford.
Pete Swain.
Josh Port.
Megan Sparks.
Sue Mittendorf.
Rich Morrissey. Joe Murphy, representative to the planning board.
I'm not a member anyway, so.
Okay, well, we also have present Brian Wagner from the Planning Department. So we're going to next do approval of minutes. We have some draft minutes from February 27th, and I wanted to say a big thank you to Amy for stepping up as secretary. I thought they were very well done. Are there any changes or discussion points? Anything to note?
No, I looked a while ago, but I noted that they look good. So I would move to approve them if nobody else has complaints.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, the minutes are approved. Next item is number 4, correspondence and public comment. We have nobody here in the audience and have not received any new correspondence. So we'll move to 5, new business. A is review of the March 20th, 2025 URI housing meeting. And I believe, Megan, you were in attendance, and anybody else from here?
Brian was there as well.
Do you want to start off the discussion of what was happening or how that meeting went?
Sure. So at the meeting were representatives from URI, the Narragansett Affordable Housing Collaborative, South Kingstown, Jim Durkin, who's a member of Narragansett Town Council, and there was a student representative there. I did not catch his name, but the University of Rhode Island, I think he's the head of is he head of student services for Rhode Island, URI? The student council president, maybe? I think something along those lines.
I think student body president sounds familiar.
Yeah, so something along those lines. He's a senior, this was his last year, but this was the first time he came, and URI is actively trying to get some of these students involved and engaged in the group as well. So that was exciting. One thing we discussed was the HEZ, which is the Health Equity Zones, that group, which is run under the Department of Health. I sit on the housing group for that, and then one of the members sits on the just the high-level HEZ group. So we discussed that and bringing some of that information that we get from those meetings back so that we can keep informing everyone of what's going on. On the agenda, we also discussed the Transit Orient Hub at URI, which they are familiar with. And so one of the things that was brought up was that funding for RIPTA. They wanted to slash the funding, I think, by $40 million. So that's...
Sorry, who is they? The state or?
The state. So that left a question. I think we were all gung-ho, and I think we should absolutely keep going after it and see what happens on that. But that was one of the things that they discussed, so we weren't sure in that group how much we were going to move forward and talk about that right now. I'm trying to think what else. I can't think of anything else really that came out. We are going to have another public forum in September. We're hoping to do it in South Kingstown, so we have to find a location for that. This is because of the response of the one that we had just a couple months ago. There was quite a few community members in Narragansett, South Kingstown. So we're going to keep the momentum up and do another one of those in the beginning of the school year and hopefully get some of the student population at that as well. Just keep talking about housing.
Is there a topic for the next forum?
No, we haven't come up with a topic yet, but I think they want to just continue the conversation on housing and updates as to what South Kingstown, Narragansett, and URI are all doing. The URI is hopefully going to move forward with the dorm, the public-private partnership with Gilbane, which would create, is it 1,300 new units or 1,100, I think? 1,100.
I think it's 1,100. I think it was like 9 undergrad and 2 grad,
Yeah.
900 and 200.
Yeah, and they gave us some information on that. But one of the big things that they did say out of there is, although they're building new dorms, it's also to take some dorms offline. So when we talk about them building more housing, it's not necessarily that they're adding all of those units. They might net about 400 was the number that she threw around. So they are going to be netting some units, but it's not all brand new building. But it's still exciting, and they said hopefully in the fall of next year would be, or the fall of 2025 would be when they move forward, and it would take maybe 2 years, but it's all kind of, nothing set in stone yet. So once they have all that information, they'll pass that along.
Do they have the funding for that project yet, or do they have to get it? Do you know?
I don't understand how the funding
So-
works. They can't do a
Okay.
bond,
So
but
the way this works with these public-private partnerships is Gilbane is the private partner in this. They are actually building the dorms on their own dime, and they will be paid through the dorm fees. So URI will not be making any money on the dormitory fees. Those agreements typically last 20 or 30 years, at which point, once Gilbane is done, the buildings become the property of the university. So they'll milk every last dime out of the lifespan of the buildings, and before they have to start retrofitting anything and making significant repairs, they'll give them to the university.
Like, not to get too into the weeds, but would that just, I feel like that would just be a recipe for the buildings getting really run down, like maintain exactly nothing until they're not under obligation anymore.
Well, I'm sure they will be doing regular, daily maintenance, annual maintenance, but, at a certain point in time when you have to start talking about repairing HVAC systems or, other major end-of-life costs, they would be looking to get out of the building.
Makes sense.
and that is a good question that we could potentially ask in the next meeting, what they plan on doing with that. But I think one of the things that they've seen is that a lot of the buildings haven't been maintained up to this point, and that's why they're going to have to get rid of them and build new. So I'm assuming they have that in their mind, obviously, to maintain these buildings so that in 30 years from now, they're not running into the same issue.
And then I'm still like fuzzy on, I can't recall who started the group. So is it Susan Bonanno who runs it? So who's chairing it? Because I'm just wondering what we could do to better partner with what they're doing, but maybe it's just to tag along when they do an open forum or...
So remember, it came out of when we had a group meeting with Narragansett. So we did back, I don't know, maybe about a year ago at this point. We met with Narragansett Affordable Housing, so South Kingstown, Narragansett. One of the things we said was that we really felt like it'd be nice if we could form a partnership with URI. So it was from this group that we actually developed that, and then she is the chair of it. But she had all the contacts at URI and got everyone together. So yeah.
Because it does seem like that's been the best place to talk with URI representatives, Did they mention any of the land down in West Kingston by any chance?
No, they did not. But that is something that we have talked about. Not in that meeting, but yes. So this was only our third meeting, so I think that we're just kind of getting to know everyone and then, moving forward with ideas and different feedback, so potentially in the next meeting. And we went ahead and came up with dates, so we meet quarterly. So for next year, they started sending out invitations for next year as well. So we'll continue forward with that meeting. But did you ever talk to Susan about, Nick?
I did, so I was going to bring that up under our future agenda items, but we would love to do another joint meeting. So I did have some brief email exchange with is it Nick Edwards, who's the chair of the Affordable Housing Collaborative in Narragansett, and we discussed that possibly in May we could do another joint meeting between our two boards. I thought it was great just to have, the new ideas that come out of that and to hear what they're doing, and I think we were learning a lot from them. not so much if they were learning as much from us, but, you know, we've progressed a while since the last one. So I guess we can come back to this when we talk about future agendas, but that would be a great thing I would be really in favor of doing that again.
And one thing I realized after the meeting that we had this last week, no one is really taking notes. So I will talk to Susan about if we can take notes on what we discuss in the meetings, so that people are, you know, potentially can share those with people.
I was also going to bring this up on one of the further agenda things, but I guess it's a better place to ask it now. I was on a call today that was one of the ones that, it was the housing boards and commissions. So I have to look back up what the title of it was, but it was excellent stories from different, they were mostly like ad hoc housing groups from Massachusetts that have done phenomenal work. And so they partnered with like a mentorship program that was called CHAPA. And so I was wondering if I think you might have been on the call too, Josh, were you? Yeah. So at first I was like, maybe we should apply to this CHAPA program, we as the Affordable Housing Collaborative. And so I was going to share about that, but it almost might be better for it to be this ad hoc URI committee group, because that's more of an independent entity. And I think if we did it as a municipal entity, we might be more limited. So I wasn't sure if anybody else knew of this. I didn't write down what it stands for, but the acronym is CHAPA. And they like basically do a training program for housing groups to walk them through how to become more pro-housing in your community. And their stories were amazing. So they basically would train us how to coalition build and follow up with different ways to continue doing that into the future, even after you graduate from their program. It really did seem amazing. And again, I don't know if this particular committee is the right entity to join that, but it could be something that Susan could look into with that group.
Yeah.
I'll write down the full name. But why did I bring that up?
Did you, I was on the meeting last week, and did either of you have a chance to look at the website? The website
I wasn't on the last week one.
Oh, you were on this week's?
I was only on this week's, yeah.
Okay, so their website is fascinating and has a lot of good information that I think that we should share with this group. I guess I'll find it and send it to Brian. But it did have a lot of those resources, and it did have all the calls, like the call from today and the call from last week and the one prior to that. They're all on there, so you could watch them. They
Can you
tape
just-
everything, so that would be
Megan or
good to
Beth?
send out.
Sorry. I was just going to ask, can you repeat the name of just the initial call? Who offered that?
I'm going to have to look it up.
For what? Well,
For the call that they were on that they,
So CHAPA stands for Citizens Housing and Planning Association. And the website's easily accessible. I'm looking at it now. It's based out of Boston.
how did you find out about the call?
So
I-
I knew
I'm
about it
out of the loop.
because, through Women's Development Corp. It was a free training. I'm trying to find the name of the group.
It looks like the Massachusetts Housing Partnership sponsored the training series, which was a set of 3 calls. So Women's Development Corp forwarded the invitation to register to Megan. She shared it with me, probably with Josh as well, or maybe the group, I can't remember. But I registered for the final 2 workshops, and they were phenomenal. So however we get on the mailing list for those kinds of things in the future,
Right.
just all these great things about like keeping a contact list, like of people who you know are pro-housing in your community, like things that we've sort of talked about but not actually done. So whether we kind of investigate CHAPA or pass it on to this ad hoc group, I think that somebody should look into it, and we can maybe all all think about, looking at some of these websites. But the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, I think, is the one that sponsored the training series. So
Yep.
I don't know if we can get on their mailing list too, or.
Well, I'm sure somewhere on there we can, but their website I thought was great, and it had a ton of great information, and I can't find it now, but I will find it, and I'll send it to Brian, and then have him send it out to everybody, because you can see all the meetings that they've had, and then all of the things that they've done up to now.
Yeah, it's just chapa.org.
Yeah. We got a lot going on.
Anything else about the URI housing meeting? I mean, it still sounds like it's finding its feet.
Yeah. It is. I can't think of anything. The main topics were the HES, advocacy, just the group in general and what our mission is, membership of the group, and then the other thing was transit orient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Megan. Okay, is there anything else on 5A? Okay, with that, we can move to 6, old business, and we'll start with A, transit-oriented design at Kingston Station. So Josh, you've been keeping us updated, and I know that you were reaching out to some contacts with that, so just
Yes.
tell us what you've got.
Yeah, so there are a couple of little updates. So one of the things I basically I'd been taking for granted, but I wanted to go back and confirm. So in the original state plan that basically said that there would be a URI regional mobility hub, and it used the very particular word regional mobility hub, which is the thing that ties into the TOD pilot plan. I wanted to make sure that now that this is not on URI campus, that this still counts as the same URI regional mobility hub. And because it just occurred to me, I'm like, oh, that would be a bad thing to assume and then not double check. Turns out it was a good assumption that it's the same regional mobility hub. The one at the station will count for the pilot program, but I did confirm that. The other thing I checked in with, so I talked to, or sent an email to Ella Ackerman, who is the one who is hosting basically the sort of the public outreach about the Kingston Station project and is their point person like for contacts. And she said that not only would she be interested in joining conversations about how the project could provide opportunities for residential and commercial around the new hub, but also that she has some colleagues who would probably be interested in participating as well. So basically, if we want to do some sort of outreach event, they would be good people to include and would be interested in helping out with that.
And what about the timetable for the whole project? Because if we're going to do outreach, it's probably early for that?
Yeah, it's probably early. I mean, so it seems like the pilot program itself is probably, best case, late this year going to be set up. And the project itself, from their original presentation, and we know that all projects always go on time, so I'm sure this will be will be to the letter correct. But I think what they had originally said was 2027 was what they were shooting for, but we'll see how it goes. I'm also just going to double check my memory here by pulling up the website, so I will confirm that in a second.
So while you're looking that up, staff did have a video meeting with DOT about their improvements to Route 138. Those won't even get started until 2026, and I doubt they're going to make significant investments in doing anything to the train station until those railroad bridges are replaced, because that's part of that project, and that will have direct impact on the layout there, getting buses in and out of there. So you're probably not talking anything until that bridge work is done.
One of the things that I remembered, and again, I'm going to double check my notes, but from the original event about this, I'm pretty sure they were saying that the bridge work was technically a separate project, but like still like very synergistic with this. But I'm not 100% sure that one depends on the other. It may just be that like logistically that's what makes sense, but
It's separate from the TOD stuff. It is part of a long planned set of improvements to Route 138.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I just mean like distinct from the Kingston Station mobility hub stuff, but of course it's like the same spot basically, so it makes sense.
While we're talking about the West Kingston thing, too, I wanted to mention that there was some rumbling on online on one of the town groups about the large apartment complexes planned for the comprehensive plan and that NORPAC is doing, mainly from the kind of, not in my backyard, we don't want something big and ugly. And so I was attempting to do a little bit of educating about the difference between a comprehensive permit and, when we get to follow our own zoning, for instance, that it's kind of a trade-off. And so if we don't want these large apartment buildings, we need to be open to hearing the other options for kind of proactively developing our own affordable housing. So I feel that is some long-term planting seeds, but it was interesting to see a lot of the pushback that I think could have come at our town projects hopefully is going to run its course and get some dialogue going, and hopefully people will hear different points of view about the NORPAC project. It's a good way, it's almost like a good test case to start talking about housing with people more.
I'm still struggling to find my notes. I'll keep going, but don't wait on me.
Okay, so anything else about the transit-oriented design? Just big picture, it's really waiting on the state to roll this out, right? It's not much that we're doing yet for...
Yeah, the program doesn't exist yet. I think the only things that I would like to see us pay attention to, and it doesn't need to necessarily, again, it's still probably early for this, but just to make sure that the town is aware, for example, if and when we ever do get to talk to the council, make sure that this is on their radar, that, in the coming years, in theory, there's going to be this opportunity to get money from the state if we're building out density in this area. And I think really doubly so with this proposed project at Schneider Electric, because if that goes through, then that's just even more people who could be using the new infrastructure, even more people that if commercial goes in there could really, really benefit from that and have a synergy there. So, so I think at this point it's just maybe more of an awareness thing. I don't think we can actually, the one question, and maybe I'll need to ask, and I could follow up on this, is if the mobility hub, we need to have the ribbon cut before we can do any sort of pilot plan stuff, but my guess is that might not even be determined yet because they haven't even finalized the regulations for what you need to do to get that money. So I have that in the back of my mind, but that'll be an important thing to figure out, because if it is that really needs to be open already and there's not a whole lot of stuff you can do in the meantime other than just be ready for it and maybe do other stuff on 138, then that's a different thing than if we can sort of anticipate that and maybe get going on applications with the anticipated completion of the project. So TBD, I guess.
Yeah, the only thing that jumps on my head there, and we talked about it earlier, is RIPTA has a $32 million deficit this year that the states may or may not fund, and that's a big component of the mobility hub. So
yes,
we'll have to keep a pulse on wherever RIPTA is in its budget and its roots connected to that design, for sure.
I think you are exactly right on that. I'm not panicking yet because I think if you look around at transit agencies everywhere in the US, I think every one of them has perpetual budget problems. So I'm optimistic that they'll be able to figure it out, but I haven't read specifics about this 40 million thing, and I know that it seems like our neighbors to the north might be a little bit more proactive about filling the budget shortfalls, so I guess we'll see.
I have a RIPTA question since we just said RIPTA, so I'm going to ask my RIPTA question. What is the pathway to advocating for RIPTA lines to line up with new housing developments? Because I'm wondering, as we redevelop Champaign Heights, it would be really great to get a RIPTA route much more robust in the area of all of our, low-income neighborhoods. Does anybody know how RIPTA sets their routes? I mean, I don't know anything about. But I know it's an important component of housing advocacy, because if you can't get anywhere from where you live, it's amazing to me that there's not even really walking paths around some of our housing developments.
I can tell you, I don't know what the official channel is for this, but back maybe about a year ago when they were going completely 180 the other direction and talking about potentially cutting a whole bunch of bus service in southern Rhode Island, there was one of the gentlemen who did the presentation about that was one of the people directly in charge of making the changes. And at the time I was I was trying to sync up service with Bay Campus, trying to do things like maybe you can increase ridership if you schedule around the typical blocks where classes are scheduled so that you can actually feasibly use it as a student to get there and back. But I basically just asked, can I get your email and could I email you if we have suggestions or people that would make sense for you to talk? And he's like, absolutely, any feedback welcome. So I could at least reach out to that person. If I don't still have the email like actively saved, as I already precedent for struggling to find my notes in this meeting, so if I don't have that actively saved, I would probably still recognize the guy and could look up from the event. So I can try to chase that down.
While you're doing that, it would be great to somehow compile all of these names and numbers into some sort of big
Yeah.
list. We need a Google document or something.
I like that,
You know.
like what you were talking about, the Chapa suggestion. Yeah.
Brian, are we allowed to create like a group Google document to put contacts in, or?
No. You can't create a document that you all can work in outside of a public meeting. You can create a document, you can all add to it on your own, and I can compile the changes and redistribute it to you at a meeting, but you can't have an open Google document where you can essentially communicate with each other through the changes you're making to the document.
Well, that's easy enough, though. We can put together everyone that we know up to this point. Yeah, and have Brian do it, and then if someone comes along that we meet, just send it to Brian, and he'll just add it, right? And then you'll just send it out to us, right?
Yeah.
Updated. Bethany, I'm thinking that this was in the URI meeting, right, because it does affect URI, it affects South Kingstown and Narragansett, so this is something that we'll continue to talk about there, but when we do have the meeting with Narragansett in May, this should be one of the main things that they focus on. You know, maybe that can be something that we talk about too, so how both communities can advocate together.
I like that idea of pooling our resources. I mean, even the fact that we were invited into that training series, it would be great if we were a little more connected and could have invited everybody into the training series that
What do
we
you
just
mean,
did.
the one that I had, that I got?
Yeah, so that, I mean,
Yeah.
that was just happenstance that you happened to receive the email
The day before.
letting us, right, and that's it, you know, sent it to me, and so if we had a more robust contact list
But I
in
know,
some way.
I can't send it to everyone, it has to go to Brian first, so it was like just quickly, you know. But I do think that website has a lot of good information that everyone can see.
Okay, so we can come back to that too with future agenda items. Okay, so anything else on, anything remotely related to West Kingston, Kingston 138, RIPTA?
Well, one thing, it came up in this, and I don't know, but Champaign Heights did not get funded through Rhode Island Housing.
What will that mean?
So they have another, I guess in the fall, there's another
This is a
application?
little off agenda.
Yeah,
Oh,
So
But yeah.
we can talk about this in sort of the catch-all at the end of the meeting.
okay.
Okay, so let's move on to our homework assignments of 6B, where we were going over our goals and objectives, discussion of future goals and objectives for our collaborative. So we were looking at the housing element in the comprehensive plan, and there was 3 housing goals that were broken down into many, many steps and action items. And then Brian had drafted a prioritized implementation table. And so I think what I want to do is really just go into each of the housing elements of the plan and just hear what your thoughts were. I think we were kind of reading it with the idea of what is it asking us to do, how well have we done it, and what would a future writing of this goal maybe sound like. So we're not going to spend a lot of time rewriting something that will happen in the future, but we do want to think about what kind of feedback could we offer when the comprehensive plan is rewritten in a few years. I think we discussed that. So let's take, I got to make sure I can find the documents myself. Let's take a minute to get to whatever kind of, does anybody want me to make a copy of the housing action plan summary that had the 3 goals on it? I can make a hard copy, but, so it looks like this. It was at the end of the comprehensive plan housing element. It's the last couple pages of it. It is attached to our agenda, so if you're looking online at the agenda, you would just click on the link to the comprehensive plan housing element.
I mean, if people here would like a printout copy of the entire housing element, I'm happy to provide that if you're you enjoy working with paper better than computers. I mean, I do sort of, because at least you can make notes and margins and stuff like that. So if anybody else? Okay.
Okay, so let's just go in order. We'll start with goal 1. And I think we might have sat similarly around the table. I can't quite. So were you focusing on goal 1? So this is not an assignment in that you have to report and do any sort of analysis. It's really just to help us save time so that we don't all have to, talk at once. So I'll read it out, and then if you want to, start in any part of the questions, what is it asking us to do? How well have we done it? But goal 1 is the valued sense of place and community represented in South Kingstown's existing housing stock, and traditional village development patterns will be enhanced. I was actually surprised this was goal 1. I'm going to start with that, but let me turn it over to Rich and Susan.
So I read this probably 10 times trying to figure out what it meant in terms of a goal description, because it seemed very vague to me, like it could be a lot of things. And then I went to the detailed section that you just held up, the summary, to look at the actions, and it at least began to give a little more context as to what the thinking was around what that goal was meant to provide. And it seems pretty broad to me in terms of the scope that it's intended to cover when you look at the actions listed in it. And I'm wondering if, as we go forward, we might want to try to refine the way we state goal number 1 to be a little more definitive and a little less broad. The reason I say that is, so I did try to come up with some thoughts about how would you measure this, or are we measuring this? Because I've worked in business for years, and you don't create a goal unless you're going to measure it to figure out are you achieving it or not achieving it. So, and I came up with a list of things that we may be doing, partially doing, or not doing, and I'll just throw them out there as just thoughts, basically, that I came through. So one is are we measuring the number of building permits approved annually that are deed restricted? Because again, I'm taking this in the context of affordable housing. Number of comprehensive permits that are being approved every year, and the number of units within that comprehensive plan, because it could be a for-profit builder who's got a 25-house development, and we're going to get 25% of that being LMI, versus a nonprofit developer where you're going to get 100%. So I think the variation you can't just assume the comprehensive plan is going to give you all those units are going to be affordable. Number of permits builders paid in lieu of fees versus building LMIs, because I believe they're available to do that.
We don't have an in lieu of
We don't.
ordinance in South
Okay.
Kingstown because it wasn't generating enough money to actually put it to use. And under the in lieu of program, it can only sit with the town for 2 years, and if the town doesn't do anything with it, the state comes in and scoops it up.
Okay.
So you could never generate enough money
Sure.
within that 2-year window to use it.
Got it. Okay, so the builder can't do an in lieu of process. Okay, that's good to know. I didn't realize that. Number of ADUs that are being approved and permitted annually, because that seems to be the bigger, on some of the existing properties, that seems to be starting to happen now, where people are converting garages and other things for either elderly parents or, rentals or whatever, but it seems to be happening. Kids that are looking for places to live. And then I kind of switched gears a little bit, looking at improvements made to downtown buildings and rental units. So I know, if I'm right, the town was offering some grant money to some of the local businesses to improve the facades of buildings. I think that's still an active program, if I'm not mistaken?
All of the money has been given out.
It
The
has.
projects are
Okay.
still active and being completed. Yeah, that was funded through ARPA.
Through ARPA,
money.
okay. So, I mean, to me, that kind of connected to the part of the goal around down in the traditional village development, downtown areas, Peacedale and others, where, you've got some old building facades that would at least improve the looks of the street and the looks of the building. And I knew we were doing that, I just didn't know where we were in that process. And then looking at number of zoning changes to allow mixed-use residential construction in commercial areas, because I know that's also things that have been talked about. Number of duplexes or triplexes built on R10 and R20 lots. So again, some of that is in the details of the affordable housing section of the comprehensive plan, but I'm just not sure how much of that is actually being measured. I mean, we may just have the numbers, but they're in the planning organization or they're in zoning or wherever, but we don't know from an affordable housing collaborative perspective what that looks like on a year-over-year basis, and are we growing, are we shrinking, or are we staying the same? And I think some of those measurements would give us indication of, are we heading in the right direction? And maybe we don't need all of them, but just kind of thoughts that kind of jumped out in my mind that way.
And just a reminder, Brian, if you don't mind, the information that is collected in the spreadsheet that you've shared, that's all collected by the planning department, correct? And then reported to Rhode Island Housing for the fact sheet? Some of the numbers are in the fact sheet, the Rhode Island, like the number of ADUs, I think, which might be 0. So just remind me how that process goes with the data collection and then reporting to.
So the Excel spreadsheet on the affordables is something that I maintain through the planning department, because as projects come through, we're the first ones to see what developments are going to include affordables or not. So I try to say, okay, here's the project, it's in the process, it has affordables, and then when that's approved, I move it to the next tab that says, okay, it's approved, but it hasn't been built yet, and then once all the COs are out the door, I move it to the last tab that these are actually available for occupancy. So I'm doing that, and I'm trying to maintain it with some of the pieces of the data that the state seems to consistently ask for, like what was the date of the letter of eligibility, what kind of affordable is it? Is it inclusionary on the town level? Is it a comprehensive permit on the state level? And the dates and some of the permits. In terms of numbers of kinds of structures, I know that ADU numbers are tracked through the building official's office because we never see those in planning. The way that's set up, it's unless ADUs are included as part of a new development, we're not even going to see them in the planning office.
So if everybody has the bigger package, what kind of thought brought me to some of these metrics is table 15 on page 96 was the projection on low medium income housing through 2030. And I thought if we could, it would be good to get those actual numbers and put them against the projections. And I don't, again, some of that data may not be in planning, some of it maybe is in zoning or building, but I think if we could put those actuals against these projections, I think it would tell us a really good story.
Well, I think also if you look at the 2020 comp plan, what they projected then, exactly to your point, what they had on the list of projected have not been done, which I think is important. And I think that we can highlight that to say that, okay, this is what they projected and this is what we actually ended up with. And I think that that is a great point. I like that.
So, I mean, I don't know the mechanics of trying to figure out how we could collect that data, whether it means two or three of us go to planning, go to building, go to zoning, and say, we'd like these numbers in these categories for the last, since 2010, so for the last 15 years. And I would assume we have the data. I don't know if we'd have to go through one of those public record requests type of processes or not, but if we do, we do. But I think that spells a compelling story about what the town's behavior has been and wants to be against what was projected.
So I wouldn't make any assumptions about what data we have, or if we have it, how easy it is to dig it out in a usable form. You may be right, it's probably there in some form, but depending on the computer programs used to run all these things, I don't know what they're capable of spitting back out in terms of data to support this kind of research.
One thing I like about this idea a lot, though, is that asking the question, what do we need to measure? Because the things that you're suggesting probably aren't on the fact sheet, and it's helpful to have them together sometimes. So I know when last year, when the town council decided to direct more money into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund rather than open space, one of the things that we looked up at that point was that I think the number is like 30-something% of South Kingstown is already dedicated to open space. So then we were able to say, we've done a great job protecting open space. We haven't done a great job of increasing housing. So, when you think about what numbers help us tell our story and make our pitch, right? I think it would be useful for us to sit down and say, well, what numbers would we like? Because even so many of these action items are about historic properties or properties that are more than 50 years old. And so even it would be interesting to know, is it more likely that we are renovating and rehabbing older buildings into affordable units, or are we building new? I don't know, what are we doing, So I'm writing all these things, some of these things down for future agenda items. So when we come back to that, I think we can scoop up some of these things that could be little projects for us down the line.
Rich, to your point, I also think if we could have sort of a dashboard with all that information and then have something with, okay, here are the things that are in process and this is how long it's taking. So we can track how long it's taking from start to finish. So then you can go to the town council and say, well, to build one housing unit, it's taking 2 years or whatever it is, right? So if we can keep tracking that, we can see how well we're doing producing housing.
And also things that a lot of energy were put into. I know the previous work that was done to get the ADU approval, and then we're not building a ton of ADUs right now. So, we've invested a lot in that. It's important to tell what the numbers are right now and that, we're not actually building a lot of ADUs. What could we do to change that?
And also the cottage zoning is another one, right? So I think that they put a lot of time, money, and effort into the cottage zoning, which I think is a great ordinance, but we have yet to have one produced in how many years? I don't know, 4 years, 5 years?
It's at least 3 years.
At least 3 years. So, that's another thing. So we can say, all right, this is what we thought was going to work and help solve the problem, and for whatever reason, it's just not feasible, but
And
good information to have.
I think part of the issue with ADUs right now is simply the cost, because I get a lot of people come in, they ask about the possibility of subdividing their lots. I said, it's really not, you don't have enough lot area or you don't have enough road frontage, but you could do an ADU, and they run away all excited about being able to do an ADU, and the few people that I have heard back on, once they got a building contractor and realized that an ADU could run you $100,000 or $150,000, it's a no-go for a lot of them.
I think it's even more. If I got one for 150, I'd be thrilled. I think you're at least like 250 at this point.
Do you know the little ADU that's on South Road?
Yes. Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
So that borders my property, and I did talk to the owner there. She paid a little over $250, and she said if she did it now, it would be over $3, well over $3. And so if you're familiar with that.
Where is that property?
So it's on South Road. right on the corner of South Road and Little Rest.
Oh, yes, yes.
So it's really Little Rest, right? The address would be Little
The
Rest,
address
right?
is Little Rest,
Yeah.
yes.
And that one is not even, that was pre 1,300 square feet, right? That one is not, it's probably 750 square feet.
It's not that, it's probably 500.
Okay, 500, so yeah.
And then recently I saw a house on Metucket, that's 550 square feet going for 650, $1,100 a square foot. I mean, so, but building construction costs anywhere from 350 to 550.
Susan, you also were looking at goal 1. Do you have any, just, it's always good to have a partner, right? Just remember your microphone. Turn the microphone.
Somebody always did your homework for you. Well, he put together this beautiful thing. The only thing I could add is, how can we incentivize, can we get more of this done by, incentives, but.
I've even thought of, we should do like a Golden Star Landlord of the Year award for somebody that switches from short-term rentals to yearly rentals or something. So my takeaways from goal 1, I appreciate the idea that it's very broad in scope, because it sounds like it's talking about village character and historic kind of, atmosphere, and then it's talking about data and sustainability and green initiatives. So it's definitely a goal about place and sense of place. And I think that the point of the data to explain the story is where we need to go for this. So I think that our actions probably should center on, like Rich suggested, really beefing up the data that we're collecting. If we're not issuing cottage zoning when we thought that we were going to be, then we should all know that. Especially our decision makers should know that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one of the first points is to figure out what we do have for data between the three boards, and then bring that back to the committee and say, here's what we found is potentially available, and here's the form of it, to Brian's point of, it may be in a computer or it may be in a file. I mean, in terms of how we try to sum it all up. And then maybe pick 1 or 2 or 3 specific metrics that we think are really the measurable ones versus try to measure too much as well, because then we'll just get stuck in numbers.
Yeah, so if you can get me a list of metrics, I can make inquiries about where it might be, whether it's in planning, building, or tax assessor's office. Those are the 3 most likely places to find it. And what capabilities they have to output that data.
I mean, I think that would be a great start. So maybe next meeting, we should try to spend some time on a new agenda item focusing on what are the 2 or 3 critical things we want to try to get measurement data about.
So we have a figure for how much affordable housing we think we have, 4 point whatever it is. Where do we derive that number from?
Those are the deed-restricted affordable units that I am currently tracking in town.
So I think when we really look at this, there is the master Excel spreadsheet that Brian's referring to that was circulated to this committee probably about a year ago. So it would be helpful to look at that all again, make sure that we've all seen it. And then it would also be helpful to, at the same time, look at, Brian had prepared a summary sheet that was like a 1-page summary of some of the most important numbers. And Megan, I think you at one point had said that you had rehashed some of the numbers so that they would make more sense, so I think we should put all of these things kind of in front of us, look at what's there, how, so that we at least know what we have, and then decide what do we need to know and go out and do the work for it. I love that. So we'll come back to that too when we talk about future agenda items. And then, is there anything else about goal 1 that folks wanted to note? I want to mention that we also have the implementation plan that Brian had drafted. I don't want to get too you sidetracked going back and forth from the two documents. So the implementation plan, so that's the one that measures, how well are we doing with the goals. But I noticed that Brian did select the most relevant action items. So out of the 6 for goal 1, or I guess there's 7 policies, 13 actions for goal 1. He did select only 3. So I want to think about which of these action items do we think are the most realistic for us as a committee to assist with, which is kind of the low-hanging fruit for us. The one about data, I think we could sort of highlight. So which one was that? Number 2, so action 1-2, maintain the updated database. I mean, Brian is really doing that work, but I think us becoming familiar with that data is also really important. And I like Megan's idea of eventually creating a dashboard or a summary sheet or something on that.
I just want to say it again, though. I do think it's important for us to measure where we are against the comprehensive plan projections, so that when we get to the next round of comprehensive plan, we might think about, is there a different way to adjust those projections, given what was planned versus what actually happened.
Right,
And I would argue-
and that will be coming up within the next couple of years, because in order to get it done by the deadline, we start 2 or 3 years ahead of time. And, just, so our current comprehensive plan was approved and published in 2021. It was mostly done when I got here in 2020. So just think about how our world went upside down in terms of housing between 2020 and today. So yeah, there have been a huge amount of changes, and a lot of our projections probably got tossed on their head, so.
But I also, to your point of having the data, I would like to make sure that the data is accurate, because I know those LMI numbers, I know that it's a full-time job trying to track those, but I don't think that even those numbers right now, I think there's a couple on there that aren't actually viable LMI units. So I think if part of that can be making sure that whatever we are reporting to the state is actually active units, I think that's really important.
Yeah, and if you look at it, and I will recirculate the spreadsheet for anybody who didn't get it. If you see anything that you know is not accurate, let me know, because that was not something that existed when I started here. I built it out, and a lot of the older LMI units, I've sort of been going back as time permits and digging out the underlying documentation for it. And as I dig out the underlying documentation for it, I have found a number of units that have come off the list because their deed restrictions expired. So if you're aware of anything on the list that is no longer restricted, let me know.
I think we can definitely put that on a future agenda, and during that time also make the list of the desired metrics that we want, so we can target them that way. Okay, let's look at goal 2 a little bit. So goal 2, LMI housing development will occur throughout the community in a manner that is reflective of South Kingstown residents' physical, social, and financial limitations and resources, with the goal of achieving 10% of the year-round housing stock as deed restricted for low and moderate income households. I was surprised that this wasn't goal 1, but let's go to, I think, Josh and Peter and Amy, were you on this one? Okay, all right. So I'll let you guys decide who wants to jump in first. Peter, go for it. You got the light on.
So I think, speaking to Rich's point, maybe this goal should have some rewording in it. I'm not sure that it's really truly reflective of what we want to try to accomplish, but that's wordsmithing, and so we can get to that at some point in time. We did have some specific suggestions, and I'll go through them really quickly. So 2.2 says to develop cottage housing ordinance. We thought maybe the R number should be looked at and see if that's really an effective way to do that. A higher R number might be more appropriate. 2.3 spoke to an outreach plan, which is kind of interesting. So I went to a Rotary meeting 2 weeks ago where Cliff from Narragansett spoke, and I would say that the members of Rotary were taken aback by some of the numbers that Cliff tossed out. And so in terms of what the average house costs, what the average AMI is, where we were with the numbers, which is pretty shockingly low, even more so in Narragansett. So I think that there is some opportunity to do some educating that we're really not taking advantage of. And I think it opened people's eyes at Rotary. Now, I know it's a lot of time, but it might be worth us being more engaged with going to some of those meetings and speaking to the public about what it is we're trying to accomplish and what the real numbers are right now. We talked about maybe even having some sort of a pamphlet that just has, here are the basics, that we say, look at this. So that, let's see, 2.6, let me go down to that one, was talking about section 811. And I think we just need to do more. Josh and I talked about doing more research on what funding is available and needed for that. So that's really speaking to programs that help people with disabilities. And so what's available out there. Not something that I know much about, but there might be people here in the room that know a lot more about it than Josh and I did. 2.7 was really partnering with SKHA, and Chris is traveling right now. I've got some other things that I need to talk to Chris about. So one of the things we thought about was making sure we liaison with Chris regularly, and that's probably also happening to some extent. But you know, the idea of has he approached RIPTA, for instance, about transportation would be a good question to ask him. And his funding, of course, is obviously very much up in the air, but I think he would have some ability to sort of connect us to the right people with that and help with that. So I'll continue to try to reach out to Chris. I think that we also talked about looking for opportunities to revise the inclusionary zoning ordinance in Article 5, Section 502, just to see if there's ways that we can make that inclusionary zoning a little more friendly to low-income LMI housing. And then I also, last couple of days, tried to reach out to a couple of people about, for 10A, and you guys would know this too better than I mean, I know we all know of the 3 town properties that we're looking at, but I don't know what else is out there in terms of, are we really aware of what else is out there in terms of other town units and housing? There might be more stuff out there that we should sort of try to look at. So just to sort of review that inventory a little more carefully. I did stop by the Oliver Watson farm, and clearly there's potential there. I mean, we should be doing something out there. I think it should relate somehow eventually to the transit hub because it's just so close to that. But that property is one beaten up house that needs to be repaired and as much thick invasives as you can possibly grow in Rhode Island. And so no one's going to be particularly upset if we turn it into a nicely landscaped, well-constructed, low-income housing unit. So anyway, anything to add, Josh?
Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. Trying to boil it down into a couple of specific things maybe we could focus on. I do think one of the buckets has to be some level of outreach. And I think, yeah, like, specific actionable things, like you mentioned, having some sort of a one-pager, maybe a couple different ones, honestly, like maybe one that focuses more on your average, townsperson, maybe one that focuses more on, like, I think there was a specific action item in here about, like, financial institutions, and I'm like, I hope they know what's available, but, like, maybe not, having just some sort of informational thing for folks like that could be useful too. And then I think the other thing that really stood out to me as like a bucket of things is just basically trying to lower barriers to make different kinds of housing. Like you look at, for example, 2.2, where it's talking about developing a range of different LMI ownership and rental opportunities throughout the town, and the action item for that was to develop a cottage housing ordinance. So I think One of the things could be to try to make that more attractive, like was mentioned, maybe expand the, the zoning blocks in terms of size on which you could actually build that to increase the amount of properties where that could potentially fit. The other thing that I guess I got to caveat a little bit because I don't have the current numbers, but we've talked about many times that the state level comprehensive permit process is overwhelmingly chosen over the town IZ process, even though the percent affordable is higher for the state one, just because it's apparently easier to get through. And so the projections, I know that in that table 15, we're looking for about even amounts of units coming from each. And my understanding, again, without knowing the exact numbers, is that we're not even close to that. And we've talked in the past about IZ being something that would be really useful to spruce up. So that could be another avenue. I know the town's already tackling a lot of this with things like Old Tower Hill Road and potentially needing to make some adjustments to the zoning there to allow for mixed use districts and such. So that's, I guess, happening at the same time. And then, of course, the missing middle that we've been hammering on forever of just giving more opportunity. I think that's really the name of the game, is just trying to, where opportunities exist to build this sort of stuff, trying to make sensible changes such that people are able to actually work on these projects that make sense and that are, that are meeting needs in the community.
Cliff was also pretty excited about doing another joint meeting, just to reference what we were talking about before with Narragansett, so.
And Pete, who was Chris? Chris Little, okay, all right, I missed that. From Housing Authority, yeah, okay.
One of the things referenced is making sure we partner with,
Yeah.
keep in touch with the Housing Authority.
Absolutely.
I don't know that there's a whole lot that either one of us can do to support each other, but I think anything we can do, even just public visibility of what's happening, because Champaign Heights and Fournier Estates are no man's land for most people in this town, really, that don't necessarily even know where they are. And so, anyway, anything we can do to help Chris and vice versa would be great.
Other thoughts on goal 2? I had one more. I was gonna bring up. So it sounds to me that the takeaways from this is, especially for where we want to go in the future, is to really focus on some kind of an outreach plan. So I like the idea of eventually going out into different places in the community. I also recall, this was before I joined it, but didn't you at one point have a table at a local event, a water fire or something, a river fire maybe? And I think we would have to.
Really get people to stop. Oh, sorry, not to interrupt or be a downer, but very few people stopped by. I think there was the one who had the most interest was the one who wanted to. Kind of be sure it wasn't going in his backyard.
Yeah, we could try again though. I think even still, like we had mentioned, like kind of like the Chapa suggestion, like of having a list of folks who might be more sympathetic to this, even if it's just for like, hey, there's this event coming up that you might be interested in. Like that could be a purpose of a table like that, of like just, collecting some sort of like e-list sort of thing for folks who might be interested in this stuff. I think also we were sort of banished on the other side of the bridge. and so we could try to like, say, hey guys, we paid our dues. Can we have like the prime time spot?
And also,
I think you just need to get in early when those nights are announced and reserve your table, because by the time we got in on that, everything on Main Street was taken.
Right, all the good spots, yeah.
Yep.
And I do want to say that I am all in favor of trying. Again, I'm really kind of thinking like we can learn from that. I did think that people would be more interested in stopping by, so I think we need to find something else as a draw to pull them in. The other thing that people would come up and say, like, yeah, I need an affordable house, but people were not interested in learning more. But that was a while ago now, and now that it is more, we're talking about it more, and I'm sure people see it going on in the town. I'm sure people have more of an awareness of what the issue is. Maybe we would get a little bit more traffic there.
I think also since then, we've had a bunch of public forums
Right.
that we've been involved in that I think have been pretty heavily attended.
Yeah.
For the most part. So I think that we've made progress in getting the word out there, and people are interested and do want more. So maybe, I don't know if it's part of the URI. I mean, that's still people from this group, so I feel like, it's kind of the same topic, but having more, public meetings like that, I think also draws a lot of people.
Yeah, well, and the one we had here too, and maybe that's something to think about. Maybe we do reach more people by having something that's centralized, and
think-
people are specifically invited to. Oh, sorry.
No.
All right, just on the idea of promoting some of our issues that are going on, is what about mailings? How expensive is that to do? As far as get a mailing out to people? Because I don't know how to reach people anymore. There's social media that I don't do myself, so I don't know. I don't feel a whole lot of confidence in it. And then what are you doing? Putting up posters? Putting in the newspaper? How many people are reading the newspaper anymore? So I kind of think about mailing postcards as a way to connect with people and publicize things.
And I think the housing fact book has so much great information. If you sent out a postcard that just had some of that stuff, getting it out, because people do love the numbers. So Cliff is always calling me for the real estate numbers, and they do love to know, how much is the house going for? How much do you need to afford to buy the house? So I think, any sort of data that you get out there is good, and I don't know if we could do mailings, but that social media, I think it would all be good.
I think also there's more conversations on the state level as well. There's a lot of energy around it, so it's really just making sure that we're communicating what we're doing as a town.
So on that call today, I believe they were one of the CHAPA graduates. They were I think it was the Revere Housing Coalition. Anyways, they shared that in May, there's all across the nation, there's this thing called a Jane Walk, and it's named after Jane Jacobs, who wrote The Rise and Fall of Modern Civilization, whatever it was. So anyways, it's a walking conversation, and the one that they ran in their town, they set up Legos and invited people to construct the kind of town they would want to live in with Legos, but it's supposed to be, so she called it a walking conversation, where you are in the place or space and you're talking about what kind of a community we want to create. So maybe doing something that's a little more fun this time, rather than, just a plain table. We could have a Lego table or something where, and I think we could get more focused on what's the goal. Is it just education? Is it, outreach? I think as we look at the data, we'll be able to find what the selling points would be, like what would we put on that postcard. And then we can develop our contact list of all the people we want to send it out to, and go out into different community groups. So I think there's a lot of things we could do. And I'm wondering, again, is it ideas that are right for this committee or for maybe the ad hoc committee? Because I don't want to start getting into something that is not going to be the most productive thing for us. So I think we should be looking at a lot of options in terms of what would outreach look like. It would also be very interesting to find out what is the price tag on a townwide mailing. When they send out the postcards, like alerting everybody to the housing initiative, just what is the price tag for the townwide mailing?
I can inquire. I've done mailings for the Historic District Commission, but again, that's a much smaller area. So I don't know what it would cost for something townwide.
The other thing that was in goal 2 was a lot about, I'm trying to see where was this one in, but it seemed to me like Oh, yes, so look for, 2.4, look for opportunities to expand starter home opportunities. One of the things that I would like to open a discussion of at some point, which, again, future agenda item, is really the different ways that we could use our trust fund. One of the other programs that presented in the call today was talking about how they have down payment starter grants that comes out of their Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We could be doing rental relief or something. I'm sure there are many options for ways that we can keep people housed. And so to that, I wanted to also share one of the lists of goals that I liked that was very concise in the workshop I did today. One is to protect renters from displacement. 2 is to help homeowners to stay instead of to sell. And then 3 is to build new affordable housing. And so I liked that consolidation of, I think that's what goal 2 is talking about. So I think as we work on an outreach plan, we can be trying to hone in on language that really connects to our community as well, because many people who have spoken at our housing forums have represented homeowners who don't want to have to sell their home, but may be facing that as the costs climb. Plenty of displaced renters, so if we're saying, this is the problem that we're trying to help with, I think we would get more traction with our outreach, honestly. There's a few people that I think, as we're working on a contact list too, we could probably track down who have talked at a number of the housing initiatives. One was the young man Kai. He speaks frequently at town council meetings, always about affordable housing. We need to ask him to bring friends because he is always saying it.
Kai is starting his own group.
He's in which?
He's gonna start a group, I think.
Okay, oh good.
So he's been
Okay.
working with the HES to start a group, and I asked him if he wanted to join our group, but I think he's going to maybe do some sort of advocacy with his and friends and URI people, so yeah, and I do have his contact information.
Okay, because I think it's finding somebody like that and then saying, could you bring 4 of your friends who also have had to move out of town because they can't afford to stay, or they have to live in their parents' basement or whatever. So yeah, I like all of these ideas for where we can take outreach in the future, Any other thoughts on goal 2?
I just have one again, which, and it's specific to goal 2, but it showed up in other ways we've descriptively described things in the comprehensive plan. I think we need to be careful about using the wording of just South County residents, because our objective isn't to just build housing for South County residents. Our objective is to build housing for people who may work here but don't live here, but want to live here as well. And as a result of that, if we keep phrasing and framing our discussions around the residents of South Kingstown, it's not, in my opinion, what our goal is. Our goal is to figure out how we enable more affordable housing for anyone who wants to live here, that may not live here, or may live here, but is living with a buddy because they can't afford a house. So maybe combinations of both, but I think, again, as we think about reframing for the comprehensive plan going forward, these goals, the language to me is very important in terms of what it means to others.
Another outreach thing we could do eventually is go to, pick a certain type of business, like a grocery store or a bank or a coffee shop, go to all of the ones within a 1-mile radius of here and ask the employees on duty right then, where do you live? And I'm betting a lot of them are going to live in Cranston, Westerly, Providence. People are doubling up in apartments and bedrooms and, driving ridiculous amounts of way just to get to work. So it would also be interesting if, where do our local workers live?
That would be pretty cool. I'm wondering about, doing it, even a place with pretty high density of businesses, think Main Street, Wakefield or something, and then just bump in and be like, hey, so anybody have a couple seconds to answer some questions, avoid a peak rush time or something. But I think it would be interesting just to see what people say. I agree.
You could do a survey. You
True.
could even do a survey and give it to the businesses and ask them to do it for
True.
all of their employees. I mean, we do, I don't know, but I frequent a lot of these places, so I think a lot of us probably already have established relationships with a lot of people who are running the local businesses. You can see if they would be willing to do it, and then just get all the feedback.
I like the idea of surveys.
Or even Chamber of Commerce.
Are you on that?
No.
No.
But yeah. Colin goes there, I think, sometimes.
Okay, that was all great. Let's move to goal 3. We'll just keep chugging right along. So, goal 3, a wide range of affordable and LMI housing options will exist, developed through a combination of innovative regulatory mechanisms, public and private initiatives, and joint public and private partnerships to maintain residential diversity and to assure that local shops and offices will have a sufficient employment pool. It's like they just heard what we were talking about. All right, so I'll throw it over to Amy or Megan, whoever wants to jump in on this goal. Just what strikes you? What do we need to look at?
I'll go first because mine will probably be quicker. Because I don't have a lot of innovative ideas, but I feel like so much of what these objectives, the actions were everything that we have recommended. You know, and some of it's certainly been supported, the Affordable Housing Fund, right, that they reallocated some of that money from the land conservation. Oh, is that on this one? I forget what, yeah. Yeah. And the partnerships with the nonprofits and the comprehensive plan that we have in place, and the fact that the town did invest the money in these visionary projects to see what it could look like, and I think they've invested in that, especially at Old Tower Hill Road and the vacant properties.
So I actually think the same thing. When I went through it, I thought, okay, score, because I think that we are doing a lot of these things. The one thing would be for the trust. I know that we are already getting money, but that's not set in stone, right, Brian? They have to decide that every year, because right now it technically is supposed to be going to open space. So that would be one thing, if we could secure that they, in the future, will devote it to Affordable Housing Trust. I don't know if that's an option.
My understanding is that's a decision that's going to have to be made on a yearly basis with the budget decision, is how that stream of income is allocated.
Okay. And then the other thing, I've been watching some of the town meetings, and I know that this is, obviously everyone wants money allocated in different spots, but there's this fair share development fee that people pay when they come in and develop. And last year, I think it was over $2 million that the town got from that, and that goes to open space, parks, and all of those things. But for housing reasons, I would advocate if some of that money could go towards the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, because I think that obviously parks are important, but I think housing, I feel like we could make the argument that housing might be better. So, looking at some of the things that are already in existence for revenue streams and seeing if they're willing to potentially move any of that money over.
One thing that is very curious to me is that if you say, and I agree, we have either recommended many of these actions or done them, it's very interesting to note that our numbers have actually gone backwards. So why is that, right? So that's where we need to really hold some feet to the fire, as, we've been recommending certain things, we've been saying we as a town want certain things, and there is a time to, really make it happen. So I feel like that could be another piece of our education and outreach as well, is to say, even if we've checked all these boxes on our, goal number 3, why are we still regressing in our numbers?
Well, I think to Rich's point, I think we need actual data. So I think that we need to show the data and say, okay, so we're doing all of these things, but this is how much we're producing and where we're at, and why is this happening, right? So why, we can all guess why we think it's happening, but until we actually know and have data to support that, it's just kind of running around in circles. So I think that I'm with Rich. I think we should focus on data. But one thing, when I was looking at this, is a lot of the stuff, even Bethany, you just said it about the rental things. There's a lot of things in the community that are already happening to support rental and people when they are potentially going to lose their housing and things like that, right? So at the Johnny Cake Center, we deal with a lot of that, and we do a lot of financial assistance to help keep people in their homes. So I do feel like a lot of these things are happening in the community, and that's...
I have a question. There's a fund that the Narragansett Housing, their housing authority has that is for like rental relief, and if you have a utility bill. It's specifically through their housing authority though, and I was wondering if is our trust fund supposed to function like that, or is that a separate kind of fund? Because that's through the housing authority in Narragansett. Do you know anything? Do you know the one I'm talking about?
I'm not sure about Narragansett. I know South Kingstown Housing Authority does not have a fund like that, and they send that everyone comes to the Johnny Cake Center. So I don't know, but I think, can't you get CBDG funds to help with that type of stuff, homeowner, repairs and that type of thing?
So CDBG does have a home repair component to it. We have not participated in that for 4 or 5 years since the Washington County Community Development Corporation went out of business, because they were the one providing the administrative support for those grants.
So maybe that's something that we look into, but with all the changes going on at a federal level, I don't think there are going to be CPDG funds anymore. So I don't know how far we want to go down that.
Good stuff to think about for the future. 5-year plan.
Yeah.
So let's see.
Oh, one other thing when I was looking at this, so the partnerships with for-profit, nonprofit developers, that was something I know we talked about before, and I know we've had Habitat and Women's Development Corp. We did, a forum with them. But do we want to do another forum, a larger forum with maybe some more builders that are profit, nonprofit? I don't know if that's something that we want to do, but something that we could do.
I think that we should come back to that when we talk about our town council presentation, because I do think that we should have as many open forums and things like that as we can, and who to start with is the question.
Well, and I think, so for that, Melina Lodge at the Housing Network, right? She runs that, and so that's basically a lot of nonprofit developers in the state, and it's all of them. So, and the Johnny Cake Center is part of the Housing Network, Rhode Island. So we do have access to a lot of those things. So in the future, if we do want to do a forum, that would be the place to get people.
So I know we've also talked about having Melina Lodge from the Housing Network come back as a guest to us.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to invite her, what specific things do you think she could advise us on at this point in time? Because I was thinking, if we are going to meet with Narragansett in May, that leaves April for we could look at data for a little bit, and then maybe we could see if Melina Lodge is available to come again. But I'd want to make sure, if we have about an hour to spend with her, we have really focused questions.
And I think right now we kind of have to focus on these school buildings and where that's going. I think
What was that, Megan? Sorry. What was that? Focus on?
Well, this vacant school properties and that because that's probably the next thing that will happen in town. I can't foresee anything else coming.
Okay, I think we have enough said on all of these goals that we have some specific actions that can come out of it. So I think we can close this part for now. Any other
So
comments?
I just
Go
have
for it.
one question.
Go for
I
it.
guess it would be more to you, Brian. So this list of actions and statuses I think you put together it's kind of concerning that the plan is 5 years old and there's a lot of short-term actions that still aren't done, but feels like maybe we might have too many. I don't know. When I look at the list, the bigger it is, the harder it is to get to. So I guess in my mind, I'm just thinking as we go forward and we look at what are actions related to whatever we restructure for new goals, I think we should be pretty explicit and simplistic in our how many can we accomplish versus build a list that just becomes a list to maintain versus a list to actually do work against.
So it would seem to me that we might want to look at the ones that relate to the goals that we're working on for this year. So what are the 4 goals embedded in this that we're supposed to be doing that will also help with the larger goals that we're going to present to the town at some point in time? Frankly, I think information is always valuable. And so the data piece then translated into here's where we're at and here's where we need to be. That's going to, I think, support any of our goals, honestly. And we should really work on that and then see how they correlate to the big goals that we're going to talk about.
No, I 100% agree. Yep.
Do we all want to sort of agree that that's how we're moving forward, or?
So do you mean to look at the short-term goals and choose a few of them?
Well, no, it's just if we want to focus on data, right? Is that what we're all saying? Focus on data? Are we?
Data and outreach, that was
That-
another thing that was really strongly talked
Data
about
and
tonight.
outreach, yeah.
Just to, if we want a couple.
Because honestly, 3, really, I think we've done everything on there. So if we were to go and check, you would say 3 is, a lot of it is done. And then, you're right, I think there's outreach and then the data stuff.
So I think that will help us move the things in 3 that are paused or floundering forward, hopefully.
And then hopefully when they move forward and do the next comprehensive, we'll be able to supply them data and say, this is where we're at right now. So they can make plans on, what didn't get done or didn't, and then show them what we have.
That being said, I forgot to mention that in Goal 3, I think that's where it has the language about we should be developing elderly housing and non-age restricted housing so that they're roughly equivalent amounts. And right now we have primarily age restricted housing and very little family housing or single bed housing. So that's another piece of, if we don't know where we were supposed to be, we can't measure how well have we done. So I think that's a really good step to have in place before we go heavily into outreach and education. Okay, so I think for the action items and the plan, the implementation things, I think we probably should come back to it at some point while we're working on our action items, but maybe at some point go back and review and see if we missed anything. I don't know. I don't quite know how to wrap it up, but I'd say we'll probably revisit it again at some point, especially looking at the short-term actions. That is interesting. And maybe giving us some reason to say, as the next plan is developed, we've been providing a lot of information on how to achieve these short-term goals, and yet they are, like the option is there, but have we seized the option yet? So I think it's always good to remind the town of its own goals too. Remind the decision makers of the town of our own goals.
Well, and I think it also goes back to the Horsley Witten, right? So that's kind of part of this, and that's a goal, and still nothing has happened with that.
I think it's the kinds of things that fall through the cracks.
Right.
In some ways, I feel like it's a data piece that's missing too, because we've forgotten what we've done, and we are not sure what we have. And so. It might feel like things are getting accomplished, but then they're falling through the cracks in some way.
Right.
So I think telling a compelling story definitely starts with, what is the reality of what's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
But that was on the radar for a couple weeks, and then it just fell off the radar because we were supposed to meet with the town council, and I think that was one of the things we were going to discuss. I know that people had brought it up in the public meeting, and so they were talking about it, and now all of a sudden it's back down.
Joe, just real quick, on Horsley Witten, since it did come up in a town council meeting recently, do you know if there's been any movement on it? You haven't heard it mentioned again? We'll see, because there was some chatter about it recently, so we'll see. Okay, let's move on to, if it's okay with everybody, I lost my agenda. Let's move on to 6C, which is preparation for annual meeting with council. So we had worked quite intensely on the slideshow presentation. I think Megan mocked up an excellent draft of it, and we were probably beginning to go over it, and then our meeting was postponed, and then postponed again. So what is going on with that, Brian, do you think?
I still don't have a date for that.
Now, I want to note to all of us that, oh, actually, I don't think we can invite Melina Lodge in April because our April meeting, our normal scheduled meeting time is when the town council is doing their next session with Union Studios. So April 24th is their meeting at 6:30 with Union Studios.
You
And-
are meeting at the end of April on the 30th, because I am not here on
Changed
the
it.
24th.
You're right, okay. Our meeting, okay, so our meeting is on the 30th, but on the 24th is the meeting with Union Studios. My guess is that our work session with the town council will be scheduled for after this, but I'm curious if that work session with Union Studios, is there some way that we can contribute and assist and support and maybe deliver some of our recommendations or, as part of this meeting, or what might be our role as a committee in that work session, do you think?
I mean, they took public comment at the last work session, so you would be free to comment if they do the same thing at this meeting.
So when you say public comment, do you mean public comment as individuals, or are we going to be, they discussed formally inviting boards and commissions, and so I'm not sure if that's the direction that they're going in, but do you know if we're going to have any sort of speaking part?
I mean, if the board chose to do so, it could certainly prepare a written statement and vote on it, and somebody could present it on behalf of the entire board, if you liked. But other than that, my understanding would be that it would be similar to the last one, where the work session was between the town council and Union Studio. People were allowed to watch, and then at the end of the meeting, the council invited the public to comment on what was said.
And then after that meeting, was there also a meeting that was planning and town council and Union Studio? Or did planning meet? There was another meeting after that, right? Was that just planning and Union Studios, or what meeting was that?
I think the meeting that came after that was a meeting that was planning board with just Jason King on the Old Tower Hill Road plan, I believe.
There wasn't a meeting with Union Studios?
Not independently with just the planning board, no.
I
No, the
believe
planning
the planning board
department.
was
The planning-
at,
The planning board and the town council met together jointly for the Union Studio presentation.
That was public?
Yeah.
The one that we were at?
I think that was the one we were at.
Yeah, but the planning board was not like sitting up there with them. They were just in the audience.
Yeah, I think that the one with the planning board Josh and I were at, I don't think, that must have been a different one. That was,
And that was
that
recently?
you're thinking of. Yeah, well, what, 6 weeks ago? 2
Yeah,
months
something
ago?
like that. My memory is horrible, but yeah.
Yeah, and that was with Union Studios?
No.
I thought, no, that
like I
was,
said-
that was for the old Tower Hill redesign.
Shoot, I'm
But
sorry.
I think there was
You're
a
right.
meeting with Union Studios and either town staff or town council, like a private meeting, wasn't there?
I believe it was referenced in a town manager report, and
Yeah.
I mean, staff has met with the consultants working on those projects.
Right, okay. So we can assume that in this meeting, that we already know, like, it's already kind of planned what the meeting is.
Well, I mean, the meeting is going to be a tag-on to the last meeting. I mean, it was the first opportunity for Union Studio to get feedback from the council on the concept designs that they produced. My understanding is that they will come back with some revised concept designs addressing the feedback that they got from council. And also, we will have additional feedback on the financial side. The financial expert had the flu at the last meeting, so he wasn't there. So he will also be able to provide input on what is financially feasible in terms of what they are looking to do on the site.
I do want to say, as we head into that meeting with the financial consultant, at one of the housing initiatives, he had to punt a question about nonprofit developers to somebody in the audience because he wasn't aware of their funding methods. So it concerns me. Hopefully he's done more research since that meeting, but it concerned me that if one of our big goals is to at least explore potentially our public-private partnership being a nonprofit, I would hope that that consultant isn't just looking at for-profit models, but also truly aware of the options in the nonprofit sector. It was deeply concerning to me that he did not understand how they operated. So I just wanted to say that. That being said, do you think that there's anything more we need to do right now to prepare for our as yet unscheduled meeting with the council?
Yeah, I keep it on the agenda because I don't know when I'm going to get a phone call saying, hey, your meeting is next week. So I don't have any more data. You have a presentation sketched out. Unless there are changes to the presentation, we can just go with that. And if we need to, we can pull together an emergency meeting to run through it one more time before the meeting date.
I haven't seen the latest version,
I will circulate
that?
it to everybody.
the latest version of the presentation.
I submitted one, it was due that night, and I submitted it, and then the next day, it got canceled. And then there were revisions, but I haven't touched it, so I don't know if.
But I mean, my last recollection was you had edits to make after
Yeah.
our first
So
round.
I did, so I made all the edits,
Okay.
and then I sent it to Brian, and then
So
he
do I
had some comments.
have the most current version?
Yeah,
Okay.
Because I think we should review that,
Yeah.
whether it's tonight or at the, I'd suggest tonight, because if in 2 weeks or 3 weeks we do end up on council, we won't be meeting for another month.
So I am going to go on a limb and say I'm pretty sure we are not going to be scheduled for April with the town council for our work session. So I would be interested in entertaining the idea of issuing a statement at the Union Studios meeting. However, I don't know that we really have enough time, I don't know, to say a statement that would say everything we need to say, other than to remind them that we are their good friends, ready to advise them with good data on all of their decisions regarding affordable housing. But I do think we should circulate the current state of the slideshow. Some of it may be outdated by the time we actually sit with the town council. So I also wonder if some of our big picture discussions about these goals and the things that we've noted that have changed from 2020, to now, we might be able to be a little more general or, broad in our recommendations to them, because Brian, are you expecting that they're going to make a decision about anything with the school properties on the 24th?
I have no idea. I think the goal, so far as staff sees things right now, is to get sufficient clarity on what it is the town council wants to do at one or more of the 3 sites and move forward with a request for proposals. And get it out there, throw as broad a net as we can, locally, regionally, nationally, to see who's out there with ideas on how to do it. We want to make it specific enough to generate ideas that would fall within what the council is searching for, but not so specific that we squelch creativity. That's generally what we're looking for.
I also wanted to bring up something in our presentation. We floated the idea, and again, depending on what happens when we actually are saying this, who knows, it might be old news by that point, but we had floated the idea of, similar to how the Narragansett Collaborative, Affordable Housing Collaborative contributes to the RFPs. So I wanted to mention in the Zoom call I did today, the Lower Cape Community Housing Partnership has a workshop on YouTube called Crafting Effective RFPs, and it's for housing, pro-housing groups to contribute to that process. So I do think we could continue. Megan, you were looking at other RFPs, I believe we discussed. You were going to kind of compile some other RFPs from Narragansett, from other. So, if we kind of have a sample of potential templates, I think that could be a helpful thing to contribute at some point too.
So I'll just forewarn that I have no basis for a similar situation where a volunteer board has participated in the RFP process. So whether or not that's something that will be embraced by staff, I do not know.
We want to make sure we save the taxpayers' money at every chance we get.
Yeah, I think there's opportunity maybe on the 24th at that meeting with some statement from this group to indicate our willingness to collaborate with other towns in terms of their processes, and this board that you just mentioned that has a means for developing RFPs, and that we think that this group, through the help of the staff and through collaboration with other towns, can do a good job of putting that proposal together to go back to the town council for either approval or disapproval. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't present that opportunity that we've been talking about to them.
Didn't Narragansett's council create their own?
The Affordable Housing
Yeah.
Collaborative in Narragansett created their own. So their most recent RFP that they did for a property that was a town-owned property in Boston Neck Road, that was written by the Affordable Housing Collaborative in conjunction with the planning. But they basically wrote most of it, and then the planning department added in whatever other planning language had to be added in there. Typically, do we farm out RFPs, or do we write them ourselves as a town?
I mean, typically the RFP themselves are written in town by staff.
Okay, because from the last meeting with Union Studios, I got the impression, if you guys watched it, that they were looking for Union Studios to write the RFP. I don't know if any.
That was my impression,
That right?
too.
So, I mean, and so that looked like that was going to be another contract that was not part of, and they specifically asked, is that part of this contract? And they said, no, that would be another contract. And I felt from the town council, that was really where they wanted to head, was to hire them to do that.
I agree, and I believe that that is because they believe it to be the appropriate next step. And so I
Yes.
think we could
Yeah.
inform them there are
Yes.
other next steps that could also
right,
be appropriate.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but hey, you can at least share the idea. But it sounded to me that they were asking that more out of concern of, okay, if the next thing we have to do is pay for an RFP, did we already pay for it, or will we have to still pay for
Exactly,
that? And so I think we need to remind them, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund paid $75,000 or whatever it was for Union Studios, and so to get the most bang for your buck, use the experts that you have in your midst and the, research time that we've already put into it.
Which, again, I'll point out that for new members, we had no involvement in that whatsoever. So it didn't come to our board, we weren't involved in it, we had nothing to do with it. So that is, I think for some of us, it's kind of, what is, at least for me, what is our role being on this board if we're not necessarily being utilized to give feedback and give advice?
And give it at the appropriate time before decisions are made.
Right,
Yeah.
but it does seem like there's not a time, right? I mean, I know we sat here with you and Jamie, and we went at it the last, whenever that was, over a year ago, and Jamie had told us that we would be involved, right? And he had said multiple times, there'll be multiple opportunities for you to be involved, and we have not been involved once. And it seems, I'm just,
Well, you were involved. You participated in and commented on the concept designs. You were afforded a special meeting to provide input on the concept designs.
not just with us, it was everyone in the whole town.
The boards had their own special, all of the boards had their own special presentation
Right.
on that. But yes, that was and you you got the opportunity to rate the projects. Everybody in town didn't get the opportunity to do that. There was only the boards and commissions that got the opportunity to do that.
I think this goes back to the idea of us bringing better data or collecting solid data. It's the same thing in that we need to share what our experience as a board has been in trying to fulfill our mission, which is only to support and advise. And if we're not allowed into the conversation at the time where that can do the most good, then it is costing the taxpayers money.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's really where it comes down to for me, is that if you're going to talk about saving money, if you're going to talk about supporting housing, then doing those things is where, you know, what the next step is. So I think we can at least say the options. I mean, if we haven't been given enough time to say, here's options that we've researched, or here's things, you know, that's part of what we can work on. The more we become better with the talking points, know what the data is, we'll be able to do more of that advocacy in real time, I think. So.
The question I have is, do you still feel strongly about this if the plan is to send it through staff as opposed to hiring another contract for Union Studios to work in the RFP? Or like, because obviously, like I think I'm totally willing to get involved. I think that's great. In terms of the money saving angle, that feels like that's not really as strong of an argument if it's already going to go through, you know, employees who are under town payroll. But yeah, like I think it's good to present, but it just might be, it might inform what tactic we want to take. Because for example, it could be as simple as if in the meeting they start, you know, proposing this, like, oh, okay, so next step we'll work on that. That could be something we could then address in common and say, oh, by the way, if you would like to not, you know, spend all this money on another contract, we stand willing to help you. And it seems like at least town staff is under the impression that they would be tapped for that as well. So like they have options other than to do the expensive route. So we could mention that if needed. But if not, then maybe it's not needed. Like I don't know how you guys feel about it. If you think there's, you know, something that we could provide to the RFP process beyond just like making sure that it looks good. You know, like, how are you feeling about it?
So my perspective would be, if staff is going to do it because they've done them in the past, I would be happy with that. I would like to have a level of participation in that, in some way, shape, or form. I don't know what that looks like, but I think if something is going to get developed relative to affordable housing in this town, and this collaborative committee isn't engaged in that process, then I question what the purpose of this committee is for.
Yeah. Would it be possible, like, maybe this is just like a huge wrench, but hypothetically, let's say staff is putting together the RFP, like, would it be possible for us to have a special meeting and basically just give thoughts, like even just purely advisory thoughts on the RFP about like, this looks good to us, or maybe like this is another element of it that we'd like to see considered?
I can certainly ask about setting something like that up. Again, you know, just to make clear, I don't have a basis for having volunteer boards write an RFP. Having input on an RFP is a different question entirely, and I would agree with you on that. I think one of the reasons why there is consideration of sending this back to the consultants to work on the RFP is because of the somewhat complex link between, you know, maximizing the amount of housing you get, what the council thinks is something that the community is willing to accept, and the financing. It's a very delicate balance there where you need to have the right amount of housing to make the financing work. You know, to what extent is the town going to contribute to any of these projects, either in terms of cash or land or installing infrastructure? We just don't know, and that's a lot of moving pieces.
I would recommend that first of all, I think it's really important Is this better if I'm here? Is this okay? Okay. It doesn't,
We're not doing this so we can hear each other, just so that it gets streamed, so.
right, okay, so it's fine.
So
Okay.
long as you're reasonably in front of the microphone, because it's
Gotcha.
very directional, it will
Alright.
pick you up.
Thank you. So I recommend that, one, I think it's really important that we do have a written statement and think about whether it's short or long, that we are definitely present there at that 24th meeting, especially because there'll probably be public here as well. But I also think that if we, let me remember what I was going to say. I'll take a moment, and I'm on recording.
So we're going to be there, and we were talking about the RFPs written by staff.
Oh, yeah, that we can use the language that we want to partner, thank you, that we request, that we formally request even, that we are partners in the execution of the RFP, or, the creation of the RFP. So at least that we're saying that very clearly, and it doesn't have to define how we're involved, but that we want to be partnered in it.
So if we're going to do a written statement for the 24th, what we would need to do is draft something, send it to Brian, have him send it out to everybody, return comments, and then he can put it together. Do we have enough time? So it's not even April yet. Yeah, we have enough time to do that. I think, too, that if for some reason, I just want to put it out there, I'm willing to do special meetings anytime, and I think we have a really good buy-in from everybody in this group that if we need to do a special meeting, we'd be willing to. That's the sense I'm getting from you folks. So I think if there is ever a time where, even if it's just to talk it out, we don't have to be the ones to put the final, ink on the paper, but even if it's just a way of sharing options and exploring possibilities, I actually think if that is all we offer in a written statement, that's probably really useful. For instance, when we're going to meet with Narragansett, let's ask them, how did it go with their collaborative process of, contributing to the RFP? What was that like? So SK's never done it. Narragansett has. Let's ask them about it.
I know I've asked, and so basically it was put together by one person on the collaborative, did a ton of research through everything, and then gave it to the planning department, and then the planning department looked at it, added some things, and did it that way. And again, if the planning department wants to do it, I'm all on board with that as well. I don't know if we have to spend money on it. I guess that's my question.
And the time cost that brings. So again, thinking about what can we realistically do in 2 years. I want to come back to, we were going to talk about the timeline with them, and I'm hoping that we don't lose the chance to share that feedback before they set a timeline in place.
Right.
Because I think it sounds unrealistic. If we thought, if a town councilor believes we're going to have a shovel in the ground in 2 years, we need to let them know what needs to happen to make that the case. And so punting, again, to a consultant for the RFP is just going to cost not only money, but time. And time is really...
And I would point out
kicker.
that they started this in January of the last year, right? So we're now a year and a half in, and we're still trying to figure out what we want to do. So I would say that the time and the money, the time is, obviously important.
So maybe a brief written statement about our willingness to collaborate, our request to partner in whatever way, makes sense. And just a reminder of the need for the timeline of the decision-making, and maybe the reminder, not so much like we don't want to chide anybody like we haven't done it, but we did start this process over a year ago with the initial RFP, right? So we can just, again, here's the data on where we're at, right? We've been working for a year and a half on conceptual plan.
And I think making reference to our lack of progress as far as meeting the 10% goal, maybe, could be in there. I don't know, you could say it much better than that, but that's the point.
So
I'll just note for purposes of this discussion that I am out of the office April 14th through April 25th for 2 weeks.
And I'm on the road between April 4th and April 22nd, but could call in. So I wouldn't be here, but I could potentially participate. if there's a means to do that.
Monday, April 14th through Friday, April 25th.
Okay, so I will offer to take a stab at writing a one-paragraph statement and sending it in within a week. Can we try to do it earlier? Does that sound good? Get it done before Rich leaves on the 4th?
I can email and respond, that's not an issue, so.
Okay, so based on those points about the timeline, our willingness to collaborate and partner, I think it would also be a good idea just to mention that, we have models of what other towns, other municipalities are doing. And this reminds me too, during that workshop today, one of the municipalities that presented, I think again it was Revere, I went and looked at their page, remembering we had a town councilor complain about our webpage, our landing page for the Affordable Housing Collaborative, and how it didn't have any information on it. Theirs is so user-friendly. It is beautiful. It has everything right there to click on. Oh, so it would be great to just give a plug for there's really good models out there, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and we just need to be at the table, honestly. So I'll draft up something that's super short and just stays to these basic points, and then send it to Brian. Hopefully we have enough time within the next week or two to at least get it acceptable before the 24th. And then I say, in terms of our potential work session with the town council, let's just recirculate the slideshow and sort of keep that on the back burner. Anything else on this before we move on? We're winding down. Go ahead.
I'm not available on the 24th. That is, there's a Habitat event that I'm the chair.
As am I not
the
available.
chair of.
Well, we can't miss that.
As am I not available?
So I also want to say it's fine if, if we just have one or two representatives of the group. We definitely don't all have to be there because, again, we'll all sit there and listen for several hours and, get a very short time at the microphone. So, yeah, no worries. And we support, obviously, anything that Habitat is doing. So with our blessings, please enjoy yourselves. Okay, so let's move quickly through the last couple items. So 7, we have staff update and planning department activities. Brian, I'm guessing you've already shared a lot of this with us, but if there's anything else.
The only thing I would say is planning board met on Tuesday. We had 2 affordable housing projects on the agenda, the one at South County Commons with the 252-unit buildings. That was, I think, confidently received. I don't think there were any major fatal flaws. The public hearing was kept open and the meeting was continued to the April meeting on the 22nd. Hopefully that gives the applicants some time to address the few issues that were open, and hopefully we get a positive vote for approval. Each of those buildings would have 13 affordables in it. And then we had a pre-application presentation on the Fairground Roads project. There were a lot of questions about that, and there should be. It's a very large project. And again, pre-application, there's no vote, there's no decision. The applicant is going to take what it heard back into design for its application. We don't know exactly how that application is going to come in the door, whether it will be a comprehensive permit or something else. I suspect that if they come to their senses, it will be a comprehensive permit because that will be the quickest, most efficient way to get that done, because otherwise they're stuck with going to the council for zoning map changes and all of that kind of stuff. So we will see how that goes. I anticipate that the pushback on that project will likely be, A, traffic, and B, largely constrained to the 20 or so houses that are in the R20 neighborhood directly adjacent to it. So they'll have their work cut out trying to address impacts with those property owners, and hopefully we'll see some good planning to address it.
There was actually two other projects on the agenda. One of those was 571 Main Street, which will have some affordable, but that was continued to next month. And then the other one was the Village on Broad Rock, which is it's not using a comprehensive permit. It's using the town's zoning regulations, subdivision regulations, so it has the inclusionary, and so there would be 3 affordable housing units there. So it's kind of a conventional subdivision, but 3 affordable housing units.
So just to be clear, 571 Main Street does not have any affordable units in it because they are the sole remaining fee in lieu project, because it was hung up in litigation for years and years and years. So they will actually just be making a fee in lieu payment.
The second one that you just mentioned, what one is that?
Village at Broad Rock, it's just on Broad Rock Road, just north of Saugatucket Road. As you're going north, it will be on the left. It's 19 residential units, and there will be 3 inclusionary affordable units as part of that.
And that developer was thinking about selling all of them, right? Not building them? He was, in one of the meetings, I think.
My understanding is that the property owner is going to go through the permitting process and then sell off the whole project.
Right, okay. And what about the ones, remember Narragansett Housing Authority was doing the ones on Curtis Corner? Remember? They were doing those duplexes,
Yeah, the
affordable ones, right?
which one on Curtis Corner? The one
Right at the corner of Curtis Corner and South Road?
at the corner of South Road. So that's the Northwoods development.
And,
There's one affordable single-family in the housing development off of South Road, and then there's an affordable duplex off of Curtis Corner Road.
and is the Narragansett Housing Authority doing that one?
I think they pulled out of that project, so
So
I'm
do
not-
they have anyone to do it, do you know? Or is the
I
developer gonna do
I
it?
don't know what the current status of who's gonna build out those.
Okay.
I mean, it's the builder's responsibility to do them.
Right. I did reach out to the person on the Broad Rock one about calling and tried to get them hooked up with that, but I talked to the lawyer, and I'm not sure if they wanted to do that or not, but the other one we should talk to them about, see if the nonprofits, because we've talked about this, have the developers work with the nonprofits to develop the nonprofit housing, so, yes.
Okay, let's move on. Number 8, recurring discussion topics. I believe we're considering dropping this from the agenda. Number 9, new discussion issues and future agenda items. I just want to have a real quick follow-up. Megan, Champaign Heights did not get funded?
Right, it did not get funded, but they have two funding rounds, so it's for the low-income tax credits would be what was financing the Champaign Heights project. It didn't get funded. I think the price per unit was too high, and there's some other things, but I think they will apply again in the fall. But I think that's something that we as a group should really try to push, although I do know that they were very heavily involved with local officials and people in the state. I know that they were really trying to push that forward, but I don't know. I think it's hard because the price per unit was, I think, $650,000, and they typically like them to be about $450,000, $500,000. So I think that's part of the reason why. But in that meeting that we were on, for that last week, that housing meeting, in Boston, they're $1 million a unit, and then on the outskirts of Boston, they were saying they're about 650,000. So 650,000 is actually in line with what other places are. But you're talking about, you're comparing South County to Providence, where they're doing big boxes, so it's cheaper to do. So, but I do know that there's been a lot of advocacy down here about it, so I don't know what else we can add to that.
What other reasons were there? Besides, you said there were some other reasons as well.
Oh, I think it's public, but no, just what's bringing up the cost per square foot is the fact that they have multiple units. It's more of a townhouse style development, right? So you have I don't know how many are in each, but you have 10 different units with maybe 8 different ones in them, or whatever the numbers are. And ultimately, they didn't say that they wanted this, but they just, to cut down on cost, it would be to build a box and just make the density closer, higher, which doesn't fit in with the neighborhood.
Right.
So it's difficult, because they're competing against other places that have different style architecture. So, the town, I don't think the town would approve a, 6-story, 80-unit building, right? So
It really is a catch-22.
it is. It is. So I don't know how they change things. I don't know how they go back to the drawing board with that. I'm not sure what goes on there. But unfortunately, it did not get funded.
Okay, so the other items for future agenda that I have written down are primarily to look at data. So I think next meeting, we should look at data. Would we like to invite Melina Lodge to our next meeting for... How is she at writing RFPs? I would assume.
I know a lot of people who can write RFPs. But I think, it's, again, it's what the town wants or doesn't want, so I don't know.
I kind of feel like we might want to prepare for that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Unless we have something that really jumps out at us that she could address right now.
Okay.
We should think that through, so she's really getting our bang for our buck.
So April could be sort of a looking at data time for us. I think we should look back over Brian's spreadsheet. We could also spend some time trying to create a contact list. Many of us have mentioned names tonight, and we could just be writing them down in the moment. And we could at least start with that. I know we've mentioned a few other things, so I'm sure that will end up on an agenda as well. Anything else that people want to add?
Brian, can you redistribute the spreadsheet? Because I might have it, but if I do, I have no idea where it is.
Yeah, no, I have a note to
Thanks.
recirculate that. And I've commented on this a couple of times when I've sent it around. Technically, it is public information. It does, however, identify all of the addresses and whatnot for people that are living in these units. So if just keep it to yourselves, I would appreciate that.
And then, Brian, just one question. If we did compile this spreadsheet of different people with contact information, say we were having a meeting, are we even allowed to send it out to them? Do you know what I mean? If they give us our email address, can you send it out to them or no?
I don't understand your question.
So if we make a contact sheet with people that we know in development or people who are interested in affordable housing and say we were having an event, could you send them an email inviting them to an event or no? Like you can't send them updates, or you can?
If you give me a list of email addresses, I can
Okay,
send invites to meetings and stuff like that,
okay.
Yeah, I think one other thing, just sort of in the general topic neck of the woods, and also something I've been meaning to say anyway. So on the list of people that I can just sort of keep informed is also the Graduate Student Union that I was sort of murmuring about a bit ago, but they basically sort of out of the blue sent out an email about ongoing contract negotiations and such to the current grad students at URI. And one of the things they had in there was, for example, on the 25th, the planning board meeting that had a number of different housing related things in it. There was also a meeting on the 7th that has like a couple of, actually I think it's maybe 6 or 7 state senators and reps that is meant to be like a town hall, like targeted towards grad students about cost of living issues, including housing. So I bring this up just to say that they seem suddenly very acutely aware, especially in the current bargaining, of the housing difficulties that grad students are dealing with. And so I've had the president of the union just like unsolicited knocking on my door saying, hey, I hear you're doing things with housing. Like it's like that kind of thing. So I think that could be a place that we could reach out to as well. Like if we have an event that we want to get some people to show up at, like, students get a ton of emails, so I wouldn't expect like incredibly high yield, but I would guess I think there are something like 2,500 grad students at URI, and I would guess the majority of them are in the union, so it's a decent amount of people. So.
To that point, they also said in the meeting that we had with URI that the president is very interested in housing and he would be more than welcome to come talk to people. So if we did want to do something, and I don't know if that'll be part of that group, but he is also very into housing, so, yeah.
Okay, well, that brings us to item 10, adjournment. Do I hear a motion on the floor?
I'll make it.
All right, there's a motion and a second to adjourn, so all in favor? Aye. We are adjourned at 8:11.